Hey everyone, I've been recently asked how to render a PREF from Katana, and as I couldn't find any straight up documentation of it, maybe it's somewhere in there, but I didn't find anything fairly straightforward, so I thought I could make a little video about it. So to begin with, I'm going to show you where the PREF information actually comes from. When you actually export an Alembic cache or maybe a USD cache as well, you're gonna see that you have this kind of information in it. It's called the P, like the traditional position. That's what you get when you render the position path. You have this gradient in the three axes, so you can actually create some masks in Nuke, and that's where the PREF is gonna take its information from because it's basically the exact same information. It's just that it's gonna be like frozen in the frame. So when you use some gizmo to make some masks in something that moves on the form, you can actually have all those things move with the character of the object that you're moving. So we're gonna start with this very simple animation that is just moving and deforming. There's nothing else. And what I wanted you to see that is interesting is that when you go through the animation, you can see all these values updating. It's basically the coordinates of each point in space, right? So what happens is when we render this, you're gonna get something like this, right? Now, if you see you have your ramps in RGB, right? The thing is when the object moves, you can see that it's sliding inside those ramps. So basically, if you create a mask based on those ramp values, it's gonna stay in place. It's not gonna move with the object. And if you're working with, let's say, a character, that's exactly what you want, right? You want the mask to actually move with the object move or the form instead of what it's doing right now, which is staying in place. So how do we do that? That's when we get into copying attributes, which we do with this little node, an attribute copy. So basically, what we do with this node, right, is we are going to specify a scene graph location and an attribute, which is the attribute you're going to copy from. So you can see that this one is called geometry because of the tab it is in. It's geometry, point, and P, right? So we copied from this scene graph location, and we're gonna copy to the same scene graph location, but now it's gonna be called PREF. We're gonna call it geometry points P. You can call it whatever you want actually, but we know the actual usual not actual the usual name for that is PREF. So that's what we're gonna go with. But there is another little trick, but it's not a trick. It's actually where are we gonna take that information from? Because as I told you before, we don't want this to update. So basically, we have this alembic in here, which is the exact same sphere but in the T-pose. In this case, it's just the sphere in the origin of the world, and basically this alembic is not moving at all. So when we copy that thing, those vertex information, when we copy to the PREF, you can see that the P keeps moving, but the PREF stays what it is. So what's gonna happen with that? This is basically what's gonna happen. So we're gonna render the PREF now in the first frame, and it's gonna look exactly the same as the position because both are in the zero, right? So let's give it a second to render. Okay, so there we go. It looks exactly the same. So if you go in between, I think it's these two. Yeah, so one is, sorry, this is the PREF from the new one, and this is the position from the old one. So it looks exactly the same. But what is it gonna change? The difference is when we actually move, and let's render again. So that's the position. and this is the Pref. So if you compare both, this is what you're gonna get. In the Pref, you can see how, even look at this crossing here. It's gonna move with the sphere, with the motion and the deformation. But if you check on the position, this is what's gonna happen, right? So this is gonna give us headaches in comp, and this is what we want to happen, right? So all you have to do is to use this guy, say what is the scene graph location, from which attribute you want to copy to which one, and then you just make a selection of all the geometries you want affected by it in a typical cell selection. But there's a little bit more about this. Is the fact that if you're using look files, you can actually bake the copy of this information, so you don't have to keep this live in all your scenes. If you have 1 or 2 characters, it's not a big deal, but imagine that you have like 15, and then you have to keep this alive all the time, and it's kind of annoying. So another thing that you can do is if you bake this file and then you reassign the look file and you resolve it, you're gonna have the exact same information, right? So the position is still moving, the Pref isn't, because the lesson behind this is that you're just copying information and baking it into the look file, right? That's all that Pref is. And then you just generate the usual, the AOV. You just put the Pref name, specify the channel. That's all it is. There's not a lot of more magic behind it. And another thing that is interesting to know is that, for example, and this can happen if you're working with cache that you downloaded from somewhere, maybe you don't have the T-pose. So another thing that you can do is just, if you use a time offset, for example, instead of copying from the T-pose alembic, you can just copy it from like the first frame, right? So you go to the time offset, you say, just give me a constant. Where is it? Right there. You go from the first frame, and it's basically, it's gonna give you exactly the same result. So in those cases where you cannot find a T-pose for whatever reason, maybe because you download the cache, or maybe because somebody who published that cache for you isn't available anymore for whatever reason, you can still do it. The reason why I do it with a T-pose is because I would like those masks information to be consistent through shots or through the whole show. So it's the better option when it comes from a T-pose, because everything comes from, let's call it like a ground value. Everything comes from the 0 for every single shot. So if you want to copy paste some nodes in Nuke to keep the same consistency for masks, you can have that. But if you don't, the second best thing that you can get is from the same character in the same scene, just time offset. Keep it from the first frame, or from whichever frame you want. The idea is that it has to stay stable through all of the frames. So even if you copy from the first frame or from the T-pose, you can always, it's important to check here in your attributes that those attributes are being copied properly, and the Pref is stay still, frozen in time, so to speak, and your point is moving like it should. Because sometimes you actually do need the position. Maybe sometimes you do need the mask to not move with the character. So as usual, the best you can do is to have both. That's about it. I hope it helps somehow.